Well, I'm going to follow the same format I did a couple weeks ago, and I'll just go over the assignment, the second assignment, the format for it. Just make sure that's clear, and then any specific questions you guys have about your text or or anything on the topic, I'll be happy to answer. So let me go right to the assignment. This was the second assignment, which is on the parallelism step. And okay, just set that up. And I believe I posted this a couple weeks ago for you guys, and I'll be posting the next assignment example, Lord willing, tomorrow. But so this one, again, I just gave a straightforward format, and notice at the top I just indicate places you can look and refer to if you want to review. And then basically the parallelism is just in the 3 steps. And again, as we'll remember, parallelism is one of those key characteristics of Hebrew poetry, where the poet intentionally connects 2 or more lines within each verse together in some fashion. They're connected in some way. And as we reviewed quite a bit in class a few months ago, the types of parallelism we have that we see are essentially 3 main types. The synonymous, which Kenneth, let me ask you, let's do a quick review here. Synonymous parallelism, what does that refer to? What kind of parallelism is synonymous?
The same meaning?
Yeah, the same meaning. How about contrastive?
Opposite meaning.
Basically, yeah. It's the same meaning, or the opposite meaning for contrastive, the same meaning for synonymous, and also the way it's structured grammatically will match. So we'll have a subject, verb, maybe object, and they'll be matched in that way too. Either same meaning or contrasting meaning. Okay? And then we have a third category, which Pastor Rex, maybe you can explain developmental to us a little bit. What is a developmental category?
Developmental parallelism is when the first phrase is modified by the second by additional or expansion, by elaborating, and then the explanation. It still modifies the first statement and also the purpose and result of the first statement. It's developmental.
Okay, good.
When the second phrase is modifying the first or trying to explain the first. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Great explanation. Yeah, that's essentially it. When the second line modifies or develops the first, and sometimes it can be the first developing the second, depending on the passage. And then, as you said, and it's noted here, there's 3 ways that second line develops. Either adds to, gives more information, or it provides an explanation or illustration of the first line, or sometimes that second line gives a purpose or a result. So those first 3, synonymous, contrastive, developmental, those are the most common that we have. Now there are sort of a subcategory called chiasms that occur on occasion, and that's where the second line is reversed compared to the first. So if you have in the first line, say, a subject, verb, object, the second line would be object, verb, subject, something like that. And so those are used at times to give emphasis to that hinge word at the end of the first line, the beginning of the second line. And then there are those parallelisms which we call formal or ambut, right? We're not sure what it is. And so so we just say unknown, but that's pretty rare. I think most of the time, if there is parallelism, you'll be able to figure it out. Okay, so that's the the second step. The first step is we need to figure out how many, as noted here in the notes here, the first step in this parallelism analysis is to identify how many lines are in each verse. 2 lines, 3 lines, sometimes there's 4. So that's the first thing we want to do is check how many lines. And to do that, remember we start with what the translation gives us. Okay? And so the translation will usually indicate 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 lines. And then as I mentioned to you, to get a final answer on that, you want to compare with 2 other translations. So as I mentioned to you before, you want to use these 3 translations as sort of to compare, and then take whichever 2 translations agree. All right, because remember, I don't know if you guys recall, I went through that whole discussion on Hebrew accents, and if you looked at the original Hebrew, you can figure out how many lines based on the accents, but that's pretty complicated and technical and would require a lot of work. I think the translations have provided enough information for us, and if you use these 3 English translations, I think they do a very good job, and so I just compare them. So what I typically do is I use the New American Standard. So I just go through, and you'll see that in my example. I just go through and see how many lines the New American Standard uses. Then I look at the other 2 translations, and I look for any places where there's a difference. And we'll see that in the example in a moment. All right, and then I just go with the 2 translations that agree. I think that's the easiest way to do it. Unless you really want to try to learn Hebrew accents, you can always go back and listen to that whole discussion and try to figure out yourself, which can be kind of interesting, but it can take a long time, and then it's not always easy. So I think we can rely on the English translations for that. So that's the first step. Identify how many lines within each verse. And then the second step is then to identify the relationship between those lines, the parallelism relationship. And as we just discussed, there are the 3 major types of parallelism. And again, you'll see this in almost, I think every psalm will have this, and much of Hebrew poetry. The Proverbs are full of parallelism. But when you get to prophecy, which does use poetry, the poetic genre, prophecy doesn't always give parallelism within it. Prophecy focuses more on imagery and other poetic devices, but sometimes you'll see some parallelism, but definitely in the Psalms and definitely in Proverbs. Most of the poetry there will have parallelism, so you can pay attention to that, okay? And then the third step, after you've identified the parallelism in each verse, is to then take a step back and just look at all the verses and look at the parallelism used in each verse and see if there are any patterns. Sometimes there are, sometimes they're not. And so if you do see a pattern, though, for example, if you see the poet using one type of parallelism for almost every verse, and then there's 1 verse or 2 verses where he uses a different type, that may be intentional. So you just want to take note of that. Or sometimes you'll see one type of parallelism used in one stanza and another type used in another stanza. Those are things just to pay attention to. Now, again, not every poem has some pattern, but sometimes they do. And so that's just something you want to pay attention to. I think I mentioned before in class, in Psalm 51, for example, he uses lots of chiasms. And so that's something to help us see that with chiasms, that means there's great emphasis, which is consistent with a lot of emotion. And certainly Psalm 51 is a psalm full of emotion. And so that the type of parallelism that he uses actually helps us to see the author's intended emotion that he wants to convey by using that form of parallelism, which again provides emphasis. All right. So those are the 3 steps. Identify how many lines, then identify the type of parallelism used within each line in the verse, and then finally see if there's any patterns. All right. So let me just show you real quickly from Psalm 99. that I have in the notes. And then if you have any questions along the way, just ask. And then we'll get to your specific questions on your passages if you have any. Okay. So,
Excuse me, Pastor Tim.
yeah, good morning.
First morning, sorry, good evening, sorry I'm late.
No problem.
Before you proceed, so in this particular assignment, there are only 3 major steps
Yes.
that you've just gone through. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Just these 3. Just follow the example, the format here. You know, you're always welcome to add more things if you want, but I want you to at least follow this format.
No. You know better. I'll just follow your format.
That's what I thought. Okay, so in step 1.
Oh, you're no doctor for nothing, sir.
Actually, let's go ahead. Let's see. Yeah, that's okay. All right, so in step 1 here, and again, I noted I'm using the NAS, the New American Standard, and I just note the New American Standard shows 2 lines in each of the first 3 verses. All right, so it's just, this is how it's given in the translation, and so it's showing us how many lines. And now notice in verse 1, when I checked the other translations, I found that the New King James had 4 lines in this first verse, but the ESV also had 2, so I went with the 2 lines, okay? Now, if the ESV had said 4, then I would have gone with the ESV and New King James in terms of the number of lines. But ESV and New American Standard agreed, so I stayed with that. And then notice here we have 2 lines in verse 1, 2 lines in verse 2, 2 lines in verse 3, and then there's a shift. In this particular psalm, it goes to 3 lines in all the rest of the verses 4 through 9. Now, again, I did see a difference in verse 4 as I compared the translations. The ESV had 4 lines, but the New King James had 3. So in this case, the New King James and New American Standard agreed with 3 lines, so I went with the 3 lines. Because 2 out of again, you go with the majority, 2 out of 3. That's the best, I think the best way to approach figuring out how many lines without going back and trying to go through the Hebrew accents and figure all of that out. So, but what made this interesting then is this psalm had the feature of, notice the first 3 verses is 2 lines each, but then verses 4 through 9 are 3 lines. So that seemed to be potentially something that the author did intentionally. So I noted that. I just did a little summary here on that because I noticed the pattern. I went ahead and summarized that pattern. Now you won't always see a pattern in the number of lines, but I felt because it was so distinct in this particular poem, I made note of it. So notice I said the first 3 verses are bicola, that's 2 lines, and then the remaining 6 are tricola. And this may have been an intentional feature by the author in order to focus on the first stanza, or to identify verses 1 to 3 as one stanza within the poem. And in those 3 verses, there's an emphasis on the greatness of God over all the peoples. And then in verses 4 to 9, the author turns his attention towards the people of Israel. So I thought maybe that's something the author was also identifying as a way to further express the structure of his poem. Okay, we can't be certain about that, but it is something that is worth noting or paying attention to. And further study of the psalm, I believe, reinforces that distinction, that he was in fact focusing on, in verses 1 to 3, on the whole earth, and God's exalted over the earth, and then in verses 4 to 9, the focus being he's exalted over his people. And in each case, the emphasis on giving him honor and praise and worship because he's holy. All right. So now your poems may not have that sort of a pattern, and that's okay. It's just, again, I want you to, when we're looking at Hebrew poetry, just be looking for patterns. Seeing if you can identify any, because poets will use many different ways to draw attention to things they want us to focus on. All right, they'll use repetition, they'll use figures of speech, they'll use parallelism, patterns in parallelism. They'll use even apparently in this case a pattern in the number of lines within each verse. Okay, so that's the first step. Just go through and simply identify the number of lines in each verse, and then, like I said, make sure to compare with the other two English translations, ESV, New King James, New American Standard, to confirm how many lines per verse, because that's going to be key when you do the parallelism analysis, to make sure you're looking at the number of lines the original author intended to use. All right. Any questions on that part, this first step? You guys with me? Okay. All right. Now the second step, this one is the one that's going to take more time and more thought, and that is where we actually we identify the type of parallelism being used in each line. So you just take it one verse at a time, and again go through and using the discussion that we had in session 3, or if you go back to the notes within the class notes, you can be reminded, shown some examples. I won't go through every one of these. We already did that in the session, but in this part, in step 2, it's actually identifying the parallelism. And here we noted the Lord reigns, he is enthroned. Let the peoples tremble, let the earth shake. That's clearly synonymous. It's the same pattern. It's the same idea using different words, but not only are different words used, but notice too that the grammatical structure is the same. Subject, the Lord reigns. Next one, he's enthroned. And then let the peoples tremble, let the earth shake. We see the same type of thing in the next verse. The Lord is great. He is exalted. He's great in Zion. He's exalted above all the peoples. And then here I noted that I detected a possible chiasm. When I went and looked at the interlinear, I noticed there in the interlinear, because the interlinear gives you the Hebrew text, and it gives you the exact order in which the words appear in the Hebrew, and the order of those words in Hebrew actually gave this literal translation: Yahweh in Zion is great, and exalted he is over all the people. So that he seems to have reversed the second line compared to the first. And so that means his focus here is on this idea of God being great and exalted. That's where the emphasis is, okay, in verse 2. Verse 3, we don't see that synonymous kind of parallelism, but what we do see is a development, a purpose. Let them praise your great and awesome name, and then holy is he seems to be the reason for that. Why should we praise his name? And that is because he's holy. All right, so just those are the first 3 verses. Again, I'm not going to go through all the examples. You've probably looked at this already, so you can see that.
Pastor
So,
Tim,
yeah.
what if the verse only has one line?
Okay.
Like my Psalm, it's Psalm 100. Verse 1 is only one line.
All right, let's take a look. Psalm 100. Okay. So the New American Standard shows, where's my cursor? There it is. One line. You're talking about verse 1, not the title, right? You're talking about make a
Yes.
joyful shout. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, the New American Standard here, that's New King James, shows as one line. The New American Standard shows as one line. The ESV shows as one line. So
One line.
if there's one line, then that means there's no parallelism, right? There's no intended parallelism, because you can't have parallelism if you only have one line.
So I'll just indicate that, and
Yeah.
perhaps whatever comment that I can add to it.
Yeah, and here might be, you have to stop and think. Now notice the rest of the verses have more than one line. And the rest of the verses do incorporate parallelism. So you might want to think about, why would he in the first verse not have parallelism, but he does in the rest of the poem? is there possibly a reason for that? So you might want to
Yes.
note that. Just summarize that. You
Okay.
see only one line in the first verse, and then you can present possibilities for why that might be. Okay?
Okay. Thank you.
Dr. Tim, verse 1 belongs to formal. In
Yeah,
parallelism.
ambut.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's only one line, so you cannot have parallelism if there's only one line. A parallelism, by definition, means
Two
the
or more.
connection between two lines, or three lines, or four lines. So there has to be, for there to be parallelism, there has to be more than one line. And occasionally you'll see this. You'll see one line in the poem because the author may be wanting to draw attention to a particular point by not having parallelism, when in the rest of the poem he does have parallelism. Okay? And sometimes you'll see a pattern as well where there'll be, I think, if I remember right, I'm just guessing, my memory's not so good. Yeah, here in Psalm 19,
It is more on developmental.
yeah, a lot of these are developmental, but these first ones are 19:1 is heavens declare, the sky, the synonymous. Day-to-day poor speech, night to night reveals knowledge. That's synonymous.
Anonymous.
There is no speech, nor are there words. Whose voice is not heard. That would be developmental. Their voice goes through all the earth. Their words to the end of the world. That's synonymous. But then he adds this third line. In them, he's placed a tent for the sun. Let me see if he does that. Yeah, so here, there's two lines, and then all of a sudden there's three lines, and then three lines, and then three lines. And then he goes back to two. All right, so again, something to keep in mind. But if there's only one line, there's no parallelism. Okay, and that happens from time to time. All right, any other questions on that?
Mine is ambot, but they are two lines in Psalm 119.
Okay, you were verse, what was your 9 to 16? Was that you? Sorry, you're muted.
Muted ka.
Kenneth, you're
Sarabia.
muted.
Verse 12, Pastor Tim.
Yeah, are you verses 9 to 16? Is that your section?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
So
Pastor.
verse 12,
Developmental man siyang nakuha.
blessed are you, teach me your statutes. Blessed are you, teach me your statutes.
Is it not developmental, Pastor Tim?
Yeah, I mean,
There is something cause and result.
yeah, let me check one thing first. Let's see here.
Looks like ambot.
Yeah,
Formal.
Formal.
yeah, formal. Yeah, you got to sound smart. So you got to say formal. You can't say but. Here
It's a
we
formal
see
type of
Formal. It
parallelism.
has nothing to do with the first. The first line has nothing to do with the second.
Yeah, they're
Yes.
two. They're two declarations.
Yeah.
One's a declaration and one's a request. So, yeah, it's hard to see if there's an intentional connection there. So, yeah, I think umbut is reasonable. You said there was another one that was difficult. Did you say there were two verses or just verse 12?
Only verse 12, and also by verse 9 by question.
Yeah.
This you can also parallelism, even it's a question mark.
Yeah, because the second line gives the answer, right? So it's developmental.
Developmental.
And how is the second line developing the first, do you think? What do you think? How is it developing it? what would you say? Which of the three? Is it adding, explaining, or purpose result? Or illustrating? Explaining or illustrating? What do you guys think?
Purpose result.
Illustrating.
Yeah, purpose result. It's a purpose result.
Yeah, I
The
think
young
The
man.
result of keeping his
the
word.
result, yeah. How can
Yeah.
a young man keep his way pure, keeping it according to your word? Yeah, it seems to
Purpose
be
result.
cause effect here. Yeah, or purpose result. If it were illustrating, it might be something more like, what would that be?
A specific example of how
May-
to keep
Maybe
your way
so.
pure.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? And so, yeah, Psalm 119 is kind of interesting. You know, here we can see, I will meditate on your precepts and regard your ways. Now that's synonymous, but notice there's an ellipsis here, right? I will meditate
I
is
will.
not in the second line, but it's not written in the second line, but it is implied that it's there. So verse 15 is actually, it seems like it's a developmental addition, but it's actually, if you had, the psalmist originally meant, I will meditate on your precepts and I will regard your ways. So
Synonymous.
it's synonymous. It's just he left out I will in the second line. So keep an eye on that. Sometimes it can look like developmental, but you got to ask yourself, is there an ellipsis here? Is there words that were left out for the sake of brevity, but actually are intended to be there in regards to the meaning? Now notice in this verse 16, he says, I shall delight in your statutes. I shall not forget your words. So here there's no ellipsis, and it's clearly a synonymous, right? I shall delight, I shall not forget. In your statutes, your word. Okay? But then other lines here are not synonymous. I have rejoiced in the way of your testimony as much as in all riches. What'd you put for this one, Kenneth? Verse 14.
Developmental.
Yeah, and what kind of developmental?
Addition.
Addition.
Yeah, that's what I would say. All right. So, but yeah, verse 12 is interesting. It doesn't seem to have any obvious.
Dr. Tim, the word bait here is not the author, but
Bait?
because some
Bit is alphabet.
Yeah,
Hebrew
beta.
alphabet.
Yeah, beta.
Yeah.
Because Psalm 119 is acrostic in form.
Correct.
Yeah,
So if you look at here, I'll just show you the Hebrew. Can you guys see it? Here, let me do this. All right. Can you guys see the Hebrew on the right here? And then notice, if I can, verses 1 through 8. Look at the first letter. So Hebrew starts on the right. So starting on the right here, that we see this first letter, and you see it's the same, and every verse begins with that same letter. Which, by the way, guys, this is evidence of, even though in the original psalm here was written, they didn't put verse numbers in the original. Those came later. But notice that there was an intent by the author to have distinct verses, because here he begins with the same letter 8 times. All right. So there's clearly an idea of verses even back when this was originally written. And then notice, so we have 8 verses, if you will, 2 lines each, that they begin with the same letter. And then notice verse 9.
Yeah.
It begins with a different letter, but again, the same pattern. Baith, 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 baith. Okay, that's the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It's Aleph, Aleph is the first letter, and that's what we see here. The second letter is Beth. All right, so that's why you see Beth here over there. That's really Beth, is how it's pronounced. And then if we go to the third stanza, we see a new letter, and this is called Gimel. See down here on the left, Gimel. Gimel, 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 verse 20, Gimel, Gimel. Okay, so that this clearly is the author intentionally beginning each verse with a different Hebrew letter, and he does it in order, in the order of the Hebrew alphabet. So Aleph, Beth, Gimel, Daleth, Hey, Waw, Zayin, Cheth, Teth, Yod. And so he does it intentional. All right, and this was just a way to poetically express, using skill, artistic skill to express these particular truths. All right, so that's a long answer to your question, German, but Beth is simply,
thank you.
that was put in by the translator.
Thank you,
Okay?
Dr. Tim.
So they put the Hebrew letter there plus the pronunciation of that letter. Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tim.
All right, that's a good question. And then, yeah, so then I think, Pastor Rex, you had Daleth, right? You had 25 to 32, is that correct? For your passage?
Yeah.
Yeah. So your
correct.
passage all begins in Hebrew with that word, with this letter here,
Daleth.
which is Daleth.
Daleth.
Okay. So yeah, there's nothing significant about this except it's just the translator telling us this pattern that's seen in the original Hebrew text. Okay, any other questions about the parallelism? Perhaps, do you have any questions about your particular passage? Any verse or verses
Pastor,
in
how
your
do you
passage? Go ahead.
how do we identify the parallelism with this verse 25?
My soul cleaves to the dust.
Verse 25.
Yeah, this one. My soul cleaves to the dust. Revive me according to your word.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, first thing I want to do is let me check the other versions, see if they're all the same. So they're all 2 lines. Well, let's think about it. He gives a statement here of his condition, and then he gives a request.
Mm-hmm.
So this request is based upon.
Can it be a result?
Yeah, it's I might put
Result or
yeah,
or formal. Can be formal, but
yeah, it's purpose or result, because he's saying, because my soul cleaves to the dust, revive me according to your word. Right? That's the purpose, that's the reason for his request, is that his soul cleaves to the dust.
okay.
So yeah, I would say agree with you on that. So he's making a statement.
It's not really clear, huh?
No, because
it's not really clear.
This is the thing with poetry, right? Is all the words aren't included. Like in an epistle, you get the full statement. But in poetry, words are left out, again, for that, because remember, poetry is one of the characteristics is to be short, brevity, right? And so because of that, the poets often leave out connector words, like so therefore or because. He doesn't put in, because it makes it more wordy. So you could say, I think, because my soul cleaves to the dust, revive me according to your word, or my soul cleaves to the dust, therefore revive me according to your word. That's, I think that's the connection, but he doesn't put that connector word in. So that's something, you just have to
so we need to imagine, okay.
Yeah, and I think within the context, it's a reasonable assumption, because he's making a statement here that he's made makes several times in the psalm, and then he makes a request that he gives several times in the psalm, and the basis for that request is because of his discouragement, right? So
I was really planning to put, basically, I find it as a result purpose statement, but because of there's no really that clear, what do you call this, clear connection with that. I was also contemplating of a formal parallelism.
oh yeah, I think it's
Because
developmental.
two different statements can be also taken out from here.
Yeah,
My
but they
soul,
are
Lilith,
connected together, you know.
Yeah,
There is a
correct.
connection in this case.
That
And
was
even
my original assumption also.
yeah, notice verse 28. It's the same thing.
Yeah,
Right? My soul weeps.
a lot of that here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Strengthen me. So the reason that he needs to be strengthened, he has to be strengthened, is because his soul weeps. So I might say the developmental is verse 1 actually develops verse 2, because, or line 1 develops line 2, because line 1 gives the reason for line 2.
Very so.
actually, I find my verses to be developmental. All of it also more developmental.
Yeah,
in it.
I think
Yeah.
so. Yeah, maybe the only possible line is verse 30.
Yeah.
I've chosen the faithful way. I've placed your ordinances before me. That could be synonymous. But other than that,
But
I
more
think
developmental.
yeah. Yeah.
Like verse 32, developmental,
Yeah.
still developmental. The same pattern with verse 1.
Yep.
Is that your passage, Pastor Rex?
Yeah. Are you
Manang.
envious? Are you envious?
Okay. I meant.
We do your assignment also right now.
That's okay.
Pastor Jim, I have a question about this italic.
Yeah, where? Verse 30? You're muted again.
It should be, and should it include in our parallelism, or we should?
Oh, so you're talking about verse 30?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because in my passage, I have also italic eat. The word eat.
Okay. So yeah, here in verse 30, I italicized, I ignore usually. So I have chosen the faithful way. I have placed your ordinances. But the implied idea is I've put them before me. So that's why he did that. The ESV, what did they do? Yeah, they add before me. The New King James says, okay, it italicizes. So yeah, so it's sort of it's what the translation implies would be there. But yeah, you don't have to include that as part of the parallelism, because it's technically not there in the original. So your passage, you have
9 to 16.
Yeah. Where's the italics?
Verse 9.
Oh, keeping it. Yeah. By keeping according to your word. So yeah, according to your word. Yeah, literally, it's to keep according to your word.
Keep.
To obey, basically. To listen according to your word. To obey according to your word. To keep. Yeah. So yeah, the it is just added by the translator to kind of give it more clarity. But you can just have literally, it's by keeping or to keep according to your word. Basically, to obey according to what your word says. I think obeying would be a better one. What does the ESV say? Guarding. Oh, interesting. Taking heed. Yeah, I like that one better. Taking heed or obeying.
Yes.
Because this word, yeah, if you do a word study on Shemer there, that's the literal meaning is listen. but it's the idea of listen and God expecting us to respond, to obey. You know the Shema, right? Hear, O Israel, the Lord is one. So that's Shemer. It's the same verb, but there's always this idea when God says listen, it's with the intent of listen to respond, and so the word took on the meaning also of obedience. All right. So keeping has that idea sort of, but I think by obeying according to your word would be the best. But to answer your question, yeah, that word "it" is just added by the translators, so you don't. Oops, what happened there? You don't need to consider it with when the parallelism. You put it in there just because it's in the translation, but I don't know. Did that help, Kenneth?
Yes, Pastor Tim.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Any other specific questions? Any of you guys have questions on your particular passage?
Brother Will, it's your time.
I'm good. Okay. So far, so good.
You want us to do each verse for you?
Nah, nah.
Okay.
Brother Will.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions, let's go back to the assignment sheet. And oh, sorry, Norel had a question. I just saw it at verse 25 and 28. Is that an inclusio? Let's go back there real quick to address that question. Even though that's inclusio, it's
Not part of the assignment.
not in this assignment, but it's okay. It's good to be thinking about that, because in the next assignment, you will have to be looking for. So pay attention, Pastor Rex. This might be helpful for assignment number 3. All right. So he asks, my soul cleaves to the dust, revive
Stay
me.
with 119.
My soul weeps because of grief. So now they're similar, right? He says my soul, and that he doesn't do that anywhere else in this stanza. My soul cleaves to the dust, my soul weeps because of grief. They are similar, and so I think, as we talked about before, perhaps that might indicate this is a sub-stanza, so to speak. Maybe not. That's something that I have to think about. But if it were an inclusio, the words would be more matching. Okay?
Yeah, more the same.
Yeah. Because inclusio is essentially looks like a refrain. That is, an inclusio is a repetition of a phrase or a verse. As we saw in verse or Psalm 99, where we had that holy is he, holy is he, holy is Yahweh our God. That's a refrain. That's a repeated statement in the psalm. An inclusio is also a repeated statement, but its purpose is to begin and end a section in the psalm. So in this case, yes, verse 25 and 28, they're similar in their idea and in their structure, but they would need to be worded the same or very close to the same to be considered a possible inclusio or a refrain. All right. And the way you'd know the difference between inclusio and refrain would be that an inclusio is intended to begin and end. And so here,
in the same stanza,
because verse 25, if verse 28 said, my soul cleaves to the ground, then perhaps that would be an inclusio. All right. But it's too different to be considered.
So the difference, Pastor Tim, the difference between inclusio and refrain is when an inclusio, it's it's it contains in the same paragraph or in the same stanza.
Yeah, you'll see
It
it.
opens and ends.
It begins and ends. A refrain is just a repeated statement,
It
usually
opens.
at the end of a stanza. A refrain normally just,
It
you
opens
find it
or
at
ends every stanza.
the end.
Yeah.
But an inclusio is what is the beginning and the end, either of a stanza or sometimes of the entire poem. For example, we looked at, I think it was Psalm 128 in our class example. And then we saw here, how blessed is everyone who fears the Lord. And then verse 4, thus shall the man be blessed who fears the Lord. Okay, so that's the beginning in verse 1 and then the end in verse 4. So that's an inclusio. It's not a refrain because we find it at the beginning and the end. All right. A refrain is normally something like you see, in Psalm 99, as I said, there's a repetition there. Holy is he. Verse 5, holy is he. But those occur at the end of each stanza. Now, if it had started with holy is he, we could say maybe there's an inclusio. I think Psalm 113 has an inclusio at the beginning and end. Notice it begins with praise the Lord, and then it ends with, at the end of the psalm, praise the Lord. Okay, that's an inclusio. Psalm 8, I think, is another example of inclusio for the whole psalm. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. And then at the end of the psalm, verse 9, O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. All right. So at the beginning and the end of the psalm, this repeated verse, really, is 2 lines, indicates inclusio. Okay. But if you look at something like Psalm 46, we see at the end of verse 7, it says, the Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold, Selah. And then at verse 11, the Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold, Selah. Now, this one we would ask, well, that could be an inclusio or it could be a refrain. How do we know which one it is? Well, we should be able to see if this is inclusio, that would mean that verses 7 through 11 are one stanza. All right. But as you study the poem, we realize and we notice that there's a shift in theme, a shift in the grammar, and also this word, this Selah, which indicates that actually the structure of this poem, verses 4 to 7 is one stanza, and verses 8 to 11 is another stanza. And so that means that verse 7 and verse 11 is a refrain. All right. So you need other information to guide you in determining if you have an inclusio.
Pastor Tim.
Yeah.
What about 136?
Psalm
Mercy
136
endures forever.
Okay.
And in every line or in every verse.
Yeah. Now here we have the same statement repeated in every verse. All right. Now here it's a refrain.
Every verse, yeah.
Yeah. Now, if it had just said, give
Okay.
thanks to the Lord for he's good, his loving kindness is everlasting, and then he doesn't say that until, somewhere else, it could be inclusio. Notice he says at the end, give thanks to the God of heaven for his loving kindness is everlasting. Now that could be inclusio with verse 1, because notice he says in verse 1, give thanks to the Lord. And for his loving kindness is everlasting. And then at the end of the psalm, he says, give thanks to the God of heaven for his loving. That might be an example of inclusio at the beginning and the end of the psalm. But all the way through, these are refrains. It's just a repeated statement at the second line of each verse. And
what I'm talking about, Pastor Tim, is the whole verse, an inclusio to the whole chapter.
Yeah, the whole chapter,
in verse
I think,
1, it
verse
has
1 and verse
the same
26.
meaning, similar verse, really.
Yeah, but the inclusio is verse 1 and verse 26.
And inclusio
for the whole psalm.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. And that's pretty common. There's several psalms like that.
Inclusio, so you're saying, Pastor Tim, that verse 1 and verse 26 as a whole verse is an inclusio to the whole psalm.
Yes.
But for the word, for the line, for his loving kindness, it's just a refrain.
That's a refrain because it's repeated all throughout the
correct?
psalm. So a
Yeah,
refrain.
but the whole verse, when you take in consideration the whole verse, it could be an inclusio for the whole verse. Can it be said like that?
Well,
the whole verse in verse 1 and verse 26 kind of like the same. Give thanks to the Lord.
Yeah,
give
I
thanks
think
to
so.
God of heaven, for his loving kindness is everlasting. When you
Yeah.
consider the whole verse, it's an inclusio.
Yeah.
But when you consider just the line for his loving kindness, it's just a refrain.
Yeah.
Can it be said like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So for verses 1 and 26, that's an inclusio because the first line and the second line are almost the same. Give thanks to the Lord, for his loving kindness is everlasting. Give thanks to God, the God of heaven, for his loving kindness. So I would say the whole verse 1, verse 26, inclusio. And then every other verse has that for his loving kindness is everlasting. That's a refrain. Just that line.
That's just a refrain.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Good example. Okay. Any other questions on parallelism? Let's go back to the example. All right. So then after you've done the parallelism for each line in the poem, the third step is then simply to compare the parallelism used in the poem and see if you can detect any patterns or if the parallelism helps give some understanding perhaps to the meaning of the poem. So in this particular poem, Psalm 99, I noted that the first two verses were synonymous. I think I mentioned in the summary here, the dominant form of parallelism in this psalm is developmental. Of the 15 lines which show parallelism, 5 are synonymous, 10 are developmental. All right, so I said my thoughts were perhaps the focus on developmental parallelism indicates the instructive nature of the psalm, because developmental is often instructional, okay? Because it's one line is developing, giving either more information or an illustration or the purpose or result of the other line. And so I said the focus on developmental parallelism indicates the instructive nature of the psalm. It makes declarations about God and then how we should respond. So I felt like the large number of developmental parallelism here was consistent with how the psalm was more of a giving instruction to. All right. And I didn't really comment whether or not there was another pattern because synonymous is sort of spread throughout. You've got 1 verses 1 and 2 and 4, 6, 7. So I didn't make a comment on the pattern. And again, this step is simply just you thinking about if there is a possible pattern or if the type of parallelism that is used most gives some, has some connection perhaps to the meaning of the psalm, the tone of the psalm, something like that. Okay. So that's it for this assignment. The next assignment, that's going to take a little more time and effort than this one when we go through the imagery. And so I'm going to post the example for Psalm 99. I'll try to do that within the next day so you can be working on that. So I would suggest, I haven't looked yet on the Canvas, but I would suggest to make sure to get this assignment in quickly because you're going to need the extra time for the next assignment. Okay. All right, any other questions on this particular assignment, parallelism? Everyone's okay?
It's okay.
All right. Now again, I've recorded this session, so you can go back and look at that if you have any questions on that. And again, just remember, all of these assignments already have an example from Psalm 128 on Canvas that you can download. So Psalm 99, I'm just adding an extra example. It's following the same format, but from a different psalm, just to give you a variety there. But you can always, if you're working ahead, you can always look on Canvas, and at the bottom there of the syllabus, there's the things you can download, like I can even show you real quick, probably be helpful to do. Let me open up Canvas for just a minute and then we'll be done. Try to open it up anyway. Okay. Oops, come on. All right, it's like my Wi-Fi is problem here. Let me see if I do this. Will that help? Sorry guys, give me a minute here. Okay, looks like. All right. Okay. Okay, can you guys see the Canvas page here?
Yes.
Can you see it? I'll try to make it a little bigger here. There. See that a little better? All right, so let's go to the syllabus. And if you go down on the syllabus to the resources, notice again, there's assignment examples. Can you guys see that here?
No.
Okay. We have all you can download the manual, the in-class syllabus or the teacher's manual that has all my notes. And then the reading, which by the way, make sure to do the reading, guys. That's an easy part of the class, an assignment to get done. Just do the reading and then note that. And then after the reading, I have an example for each of these assignments. All right. So for example, the imagery and poetic analysis, which is the next assignment. See if I can, if you hit the download, you can then open that assignment. All right, which I can then show you here. Okay, here is that assignment for Psalm 128. All right, and I'll still provide you with an example from Psalm 99 so you can see two different examples, but it'll follow the same format. All right, so just to let you know, so you can go on Canvas and download a previous example for that assignment as well. Okay, so for this week, you have a few more days to finish parallelism, but again, I would suggest make sure to get it done soon so that you can have more time for the third assignment if you have not yet completed that, okay? And then as always, you're welcome to message me if you have questions, specific questions. I'm happy to help. in any way I can, okay? All right.
Pastor Tim, when will you post the example assignment for the next?
Psalm 99.
For number 3.
Yeah,
For number 3.
I should be able to do that when I go off the call here. I should be able to do that in the next hour or so.
Okay.
Okay. And then again, you'll
Thank
also
you.
have
Thank you,
access
Pastor Tim.
to Psalm 128 on Canvas if you want that example too. But yeah, I'll get Psalm 99. Since we're ending early, I have a little time I can do it tonight.
Thank you, Pastor Tim.
Full time next Friday we have meetings.
Next Friday,
Next
yes.
Friday.
Next
Yeah,
Friday,
Friday.
yeah, we'll meet to discuss the assignment 3, which is the imagery and poetic analysis assignment. All right, so that'll be next Friday, October 23rd. Okay. Yes. Okay. Well, if there's no other questions, men, thanks for your time. Let me ask Kenneth, would you mind closing us in prayer?
Yes, Pastor Tim.
Thank you.